We begin the Gemara today on Daf Memhei Amud Aleph, in the middle of the Amud, about 6 lines after the wide lines, where it says Amalei Abaya. So we're in the middle of a sugya here. The Gemara is discussing the halacha of a Bas Yisrael that has having a child together with an Eved and or a Eved Kachavim. So the Gemara brought a few opinions, whether the child is a mamzer or the child is kosher. Before, the Gemara brought that Rav Yosef said, that Rav Dimi said, that Rabbi's opinion is that the child is going to be posel. And that's why we paskin like Rabbi, that the child is a mamzer posel. So here the Gemara brings that there's another version, that Rabbi actually said that the child is kosher. Amalei Abaye, so Abaye said to Rav Yosef, my chaz is the samchas of Rav Dimi. What do you see that you're relying on what Rav Dimi said in the name of Rabbi? Smoich ad Ravin. Maybe you should rather rely on what Ravin said. The Chiyas Ravin, when Ravin came, he said, Rab Nosson v'Rab Yudah Nasi, both Rab Nosson and Rab Yudah Nasi, Meirim Balatera. They both paskin that this child is mutter. Uman Rab Yudah Nasi, who's Rab Yudah Nasi? Rabbi. This is Rabbi. So we see that Rabbi, he's the one that held that the child is mutter. So we should paskin like Rabbi that the child is mutter. Now the Gemara says, Vaf Rav Meirim Balatera. Rav also paskined that a child born from a Bas Yisrael and a Goy is kosher. And the Gemara brings a story of what happened by Rav himself. There's a child that was born from such a marriage that came to Rav. So he asked Rav, Ovid kechavim ve'eved abba Bas Yisrael. What's going to be the halacha in this case? Mahu. Amalei. So Rav answered him, Havlat kosher. The child that's born is kosher. Amalei. So this person says to Rav, if so, havli bratach. Give me your daughter. Let me get married to your daughter. You said that I'm kosher to get married to Klal Yisrael, so I want to marry your daughter. Lo yehivnu loch. So Rav said to him, no, I'm not giving my daughter to get married to you. Okay, so what happened? So now, Shimi Bachia Rav, when Shimi Bachia saw this, that Rav is paskening that this person is kosher, but he doesn't want to actually rely on that to give his daughter to this person. So Shimi Bachia said to Rav, he said to him with the following analogy. Amri Inchi, people say, Gamla b'Modai, a camel in Modai. Modai is a faraway place. So you have a camel in Modai, a kave rokta. It dances with all its 4 legs in a small area like a kav, which is so small that it's really impossible that when it dances around, it stays in one place like a kav. So Rashi says, this is being said like as a guzma, that when you say something, and then you're not ready to demonstrate it, that you're actually acting on what you said, so that means that what you said is not really true. So he says to Rav, so ha kava, here there's a kav, there's that little area, v'ha gamble, and we have a donkey, v'ha modai, and here is modai, v'lei rakta. And I see that what you're saying is not true. So he's telling Rav, so there's a big machlokes about this for many years. Finally you're paskening that this person is mutter, and then when it comes to actually applying it and to allow him to marry your daughter, you're not applying it. So you're just saying a heter as a guzma, so it's not real.
Everything else was so good that he has to give him his daughter. I mean, Rav was
his
daughter to just anybody.
And
even not such a case.
And Rav didn't want to give it to him because of the yichus. He didn't want to.
And besides the yichus, if the yichus would be good, he gives it to everybody who has yichus.
Yeah, you have to has to be a. But kanira, I think the Ben Ish Chai and the Ben Yoda says that because this was a machlokes for so many years, and finally Rav paskin that it's mutter. If Rav is not going to actually apply his psak, then there'll be a koil. Everybody's going to say, look, Rav didn't act upon his psak. So Rav himself wasn't so sure about his psak. And that's why. So he's telling him that if you paskin like this after so many years of this machlokes, you have to take action in order that people should see that you're serious, that you're convinced that your psak is right. Amalei. So Rav says to him, Inehevik Yeshua ben Nun, even if this person here will be like on the level of Yeshua ben Nun, le'yivne le'brate. I'm not going to give him my daughter. In other words, it has nothing to do. I don't want to give him my daughter, even if he would be a very big tzaddik. So he said to him, no, punkt verkehrt. That's a problem because Yeshua ben Nun. If he would be like Yeshua ben Nun, so if you, the master Rav, will not give him his daughter, others are going to give him the daughter. Hi, though, this individual, which is not like Yeshua ben Nun, Imar leyavle, if you're not going to give your daughter to marry me, to marry him, this person, achrin leyavle, nobody else is going to want to marry off their daughter to him. Everyone's going to say, look, Rav didn't want to do this, probably because Rav wasn't sure that he's mutter to marry into Klal Yisrael. So what happened? The end of the story is, this person did not want to go away from Rav. He didn't want to give into this. Yav be'einei, Rav gazed at him with a hakpada. Rav looked at him and v'shachiv, and this person passed away. So again, the Ben Yoyada, he says that the reason why this happened, that this person passed away, is because if this person would not pass away, and the end of the story would be that Rav did not marry his daughter off to this person, then people would say, look, Rav did not rely on his heter. But now this person passed away, so people will not say that. People will say, look, he passed away, but maybe Rav would have given him his daughter. So the Gemara, Rav Masna Rav Masna also paskind that this person born from a Bas Yisrael that married a guy is mutter. Rav Yehuda Rav Yehuda also paskind that this child is mutter. Where we see this also in a story that happened by Rav Yehuda. The Chiyasal Kameid Rav Yehuda, such an individual came to Rav Yehuda. Amalei, what did Rav Yehuda tell him? Zili Tamer, go disguise yourself so you can go and get married into Klal Yisrael. Oi Nasiv Bas Minoch, or go get married to somebody that's like you, that has a Yiddish mother and a Goyish father, and you'll be able to get married. So we see that Rav Yehuda must have held that he's mutter to Klal Yisrael. If he wouldn't be mutter to Klal Yisrael, Rav Yehuda wouldn't give a eitzah that you should go disguise yourself and he's a mamzer and he should go get married into Klal Yisrael. Similar, when such a person came to Rav Amalei, Rav said to him, Oi Goli, or go into exile and people won't know who you are and you can get married into Klal Yisrael. Oi Nasiv Bas Minoch, or marry somebody that's like you and will agree to marry you. Okay, now the Gemara starts a new shaila, a new discussion here, a new sugya. Shalchulei b'nei b'michsi l'Rabba. The people of B'michsi sent to ask the following question by Rabba. A person that's half Eved and half freed. For example, he was owned by partners, and one partner freed him, one partner did not. So we know Eved Kanani, once he's freed, so he becomes a full Yid. So this is a person that's half Ben Chayrin and half Eved Kanani. Haba Bas Yisrael, and he has a relation with the Bas Yisrael. So Mahu, the question is, what's the story with the child that's born here? Is he kosher? Is he not? Amalei, so Rabbi answered, now we paskin before Evet kuloi amrinan kosher. If an Evet, a full Evet, that has a relation with a Bas Yisrael, the child will be kosher. Chetzia mibaya. So needless to say that in a case where it's a half Evet and a half Yid, for sure the child that's born should be kosher. So Rav Yosef asks on this. Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef said, Mara de Shmaite, the master of the halacha that you just quoted, that a Bas Yisrael that marries an Eved, the child is kosher, Manu. Who is that? Rav Yehuda. One of the Amiraim that we quoted before that said so was Rav Yehuda. Now, but for Rav Yehuda himself said about this exact case here, that if a person is half Eved and half Ben Chayrin, Haba Bas Yisrael has a relation with a Bas Yisrael, Oisei Vlad, the child that's born, Ein Le Takana, doesn't have any Takana, he cannot get married into Klal Yisrael. So we see over here that Rav Yehuda clearly said that in such a case it's a problem. So how could Rabbi say that for sure it's a kal v'chaymer, that for sure she can get married into Klal Yisrael? So the Gemara answers, it depends on the case. Ki itme de Rav Yehuda, the case that Rav Yehuda said that the child doesn't have a takane, kogain, the case was the Kaddish Bas Yisrael. So he's half a Yid. So he, being half a Yid, went and was Mekadesh, this Bas Yisrael, that half of him, which is a Yid, was Mekadesh, the Bas Yisrael. So therefore, what happens over here? So now, as far as the part of him, which is a Ben Chayrin, he's married to her, and therefore now she's an Eshes Ish. So now the Nimtza, Tzad Avdus Shabai. Now the other half of him, which is still an Eved, and cannot be Mekadesh, this Bas Yisrael. So that part of him, which is an Eved, Mishtamish Be'eshes Ish. He's having a relation with this woman, which is an Eshes Ish, with he himself was Mekadesh her as a Ben Chayrin. So she's an Eishes Ish because of his part, it's a Ben Chayrin. And now the part of him, which is an Eved, is coming and having a relation with her. So then, in such a case, an Eishes Ish, a child born from an Eishes Ish, will be a Mamzer. Just like by a Yid, anytime you have a relation with an Eishes Ish, the child that's born is a Mamzer, it's a Issachar. So over here as well, the Tzad Chayrus, that was Makadisher as Eishes Ish, so now the Tzad Avdus is having a relation with an Eishes Ish. That's the case when Rav Yehuda said that the child doesn't have a takana. But the Gemara asks on this, Va'amri Nerdoi, but Nerdoi said, Mishmei de Rav Yaakov, in the name of Rav Yaakov, as follows. The Divrei HaPaisel, the one that says that a child that's born from a Bas Yisrael, that had a relation with a Goy, Paisel Afilu B'Pnuya. He says that the child will be pasul, the child will be a mamzer, even if she was not a Eishes Ish, even if she was single. The Divrei HaMachsher, and the opinion that says that the child that's born is going to be kosher, Machsher Afilu B'Eishes Ish. He says that the child will be born even if it was an Eishes Ish. So over here, how could you make this distinction that over here, because he's having a relation, the Tzad Avdus is having a relation with this woman which is married to the Tzad Cheres and is Eishes Ish, and therefore the child doesn't have a takana. But we see over here that he clearly said that even if it's an Eishes Ish, still the child will be kosher. Okay, and now over here in this statement, Nerdoi brings the source, Bechlal, of the machlokes that we had until here in the sugya, b'nigei to a child that's born from a Bas Yisrael that has a relation with a guy. So we had the machlokes if the child is a mamzer or not, and here he brings the source of this machlokes. Ushneim lo ylamdua ela me'eishes av. They both learn out their opinion from Eishes Av. Eishes Av is one of the arayis, and over there is the source that if you get married to, or if you have a relation with someone which is Issachar, the child that's born is a mamzer. Rashi brings, because over there, we'll see it later in the Gemara. The Gemara brings it that because right after the erva of Eishes Av, it says, Lo Yovei Mamzer, so we learn out from there that a relation with a Kodesh, the child that's born is a Mamzer. So now the question is, do we compare and say the same thing b'negei to Bas Yisrael that has a relation with a goy? So now, man the apostle Sovar, the one that says that the Bas Yisrael that has a relation with a goy, the child will be apostle. So he says you could compare it to Eishes Av, because ma Eishes Av, just like by this erva of Eishes Av, the leitofsi but kiddushin, the kiddushin doesn't take effect, and avlad mamzer, so the child is a mamzer. Av kol the leitofsi but kiddushin avlad mamzer. So too, anytime there's no kiddushin, the child that's born is a mamzer. So a Bas Yisrael that has a relation with a guy, there's no kiddushin, so the child is a mamzer. This is the svara the Gemara said at the beginning of the sugya. But Haman the Machsher, the one that says that the child that's born is kosher, says you can't compare it to Eishes Av. Why not? Savar, he holds, ma Eishes Av, I say that just like by Eishes Av, it's only for this person, that this woman is the wife of his father. For him, the Kedushin is not taifis. But lachrini, tafsiba Kedushin. But this woman, for other people that are not a relative, the Kedushin will be taifis. Then, in such a case, I say that this erva, the child that's born, will be a mamzer. Lafuki avid kechavim ve'eved, but this excludes the case of a goy or an eved, the letafshu be Kedushin klal. Over here, for nobody, the Kedushin is not taifis at all. So a child that's born from such a kind of a relation is not going to be a mamzer. So the Rashba explains the pshat in this Gemara, because simply you can ask, it seems to be even worse. Over here, it's not only a erva that's not taifis for a relative, but it's not taifis for anybody. So for sure the child should be mamzer. So the Rashba says, the fact that the Kedushin is not taifis for anybody shows that it's not because of the Isser that it's not taifis. It's not because there's an erva and an Isser, therefore it's not taifis. It's because by a goy, he's not b'teiras Kedushin b'chlal. The whole concept of Kedushin is not shaykh to a goy. So therefore, this is not compared to Eishes Av, where the reason why it's not taifis is because of the Isser, because you will ave on the Isser of Kodesh. So therefore over here, the child is not going to be a mamzer. Yeah, exactly. Not even Isser Menatayri either, according to if it's a goy. Eved is a Isser Lav. Okay, Al Kapanim, here we see the source of this machlekes, but the Gemara brought this up because of what it said before, that whether it's a Eishes Ish, whether it's a Pnuya, either way, the one that's Machsher is Machsher, it doesn't make a distinction. So if so, the question is, how do we answer over here what we said before, that the person that has a relation with a Chetzi Eved and a Chetzi Ben Chayrin, so the Rav Yehuda said that the child ain't le takana. Why not? So the Gemara explains, Elo ki yitmeh de Rav Yehuda. When Rav Yehuda said that the child doesn't have a takana, what's the case of here? Kogoin shaba al Eishes Ish. The case over here is that he has a relation with an Eishes Ish. So this Chatzi Eved, v'Chatzi Ben Chayrim. So he's coming and having a relation with a Bas Yisrael, which is an Eishes Ish. In other words, not like we wanted to say before that right now, the half of him that's Chayris went and was Mekadosh. No. She's already an Eishes Ish. And therefore, v'nimtza, tzad Chayris shaboy mishtamish be'Eishes Ish. Here, the issue is not that the tzad Avdus is having a relation with the tzad Chayris that was Mekadosh her now. No, she was before an Eishes Ish. So because she's an Eishes Ish, so the tzad Chayris is having a relation with an Eishes Ish, and like the halacha by every yid that has a relation with an Eishes Ish, the child that's born is a mamzer. That's the case that Rav Yehuda said that the child will be a mamzer. So in other words, the chiddush of Rav Yehuda before was to say, you might think because he's not a full yid, so maybe the whole mamzer that comes from a relation with an Eishes Ish does not apply. So he says, no, there's a half a chedus, and that half chedus had a relation with an Eishes Ish, and therefore the child will be a mamzer. Okay, Omar Ravine, now the Gemara says, Ravine said, Omali Rav Gaza. Rav Gaza told me, Ikla Rabbi Yosi Ba'ovin Lasrin. Rabbi Yosi Ba'ovin was found, he came to our place, to our city. V'hava uvde b'pnuya, and there was a case with a pnuya, with a girl, with a Bas Yisrael that was single, and v'achsha, and he was machsha her to even though she had a relation with a guy, and he was machsha the child. Be'eishes ish, but then she was an eishes ish, u'pasel, and then he said that the child is pasel. So he made a chilik between a pnuya and eishes ish. Rav Sheishes argues, and he said, "L'didi amali Rav Gaza." To me, Rav Gaza told me, "Lo Rav Yosi bar Oven have." First of all, it was not Rav Yosi bar Oven, nor Rav Yosi bar Zvida have. The one that came and said this halacha was Rav Yosi bar Zvida. And va'achsher bein bepnuya bein be'eishes ish. And he said that whether she was a pnuya, whether she was an eishes ish, either way, the child that's born is going to be kosher. He said in the name of Ravina, Ikla Ameimer La'asrin, Ameimer came to our place, and Va'achsher, and he also said that the child will be kosher, Bein Bepnuya, Bein Be'eishes Ish, whether she was a Pnuya, whether she was an Eishes Ish. Now what's the halacha on this after this whole sugya of here? V'hilchase, the halacha is, Ovid Kechavim Ve'eved Habal Bas Yisrael, a guy or an Eved that has a relation with a Bas Yisrael, Havlad kosher. The child will be kosher, bein bepnuya, bein be'eishes ish. Whether she's a pnuya, whether she's an eishes ish. Okay, so this is the final halacha, but there is actually a machlokes rishonim regarding what we spoke about before, whether this child that's born will be kosher for a kohen. Because before in the Gemara it said that even if the child's not a mamzer, but still the child is mekolkol, be pasal to a kohen. Some rishonim say that since over here in the final halacha, the Gemara does not clarify, but to a kohen shall be pasal, that the child is kosher even for a kohen. But it's a machlokes. Other Rishonim disagree. It's brought in Shulchan Aruch both days. Some say that no, for a kohen the child will be pasul. Sagt the Gemara, Rave achsherei l'Rav Mari bar Rachel. Rave was machsher Rav Mari, which was the son of Rachel. So he was the son. His mother was a yid, Rachel, but his father was a guy. This is actually another place the Gemara brings this in Kedushin. The Gemara there says that Rav Mari, his father, was a ger, but his father became a ger after his mother became pregnant with him. His father's name, I think, was Isser Giyura. So that's usually, for his honor, we don't say Mari bar, his father, which was not a yid when he was born, or at least when his mother was pregnant with him. So we call him Mari bar Rachel. So he became pregnant from a Goyish father. So Rava was machsher him. And not only was he machsherim, umanye bepursi the bavel, he also appointed him in a position of leadership over the Yidden in Bavel. And the Gemara explains what the chiddush in this is. Even though the master has said regarding appointing a king, when you appoint a king, so what's the halacha? So the Bachris adds mekerev achecha, that has to be from amongst your brothers, which means kol misim shata meisim al yehu ela mekerev achecha. Anytime you appoint someone, which means not only a king, but b'chla, whenever you appoint someone to a position of leadership, it should be from someone that's amongst your brothers. So l'chayr over here he has a goyish father who says he's considered to be mikerev achecha, but still he said, "Hi over here, kivin the imay mi Yisrael, because his mother is a yid, mikerev achecha kerinim bei." He's considered to be from amongst your brothers, and he could be appointed to this position. So over here also there's a machlokes rishonim about this. The Rambam says that from this Gemara you learn even b'negei tam melech. You could appoint even a king as long as his mother is a yid. But other rishonim say that no, that he agrees that b'negei tam melech, the father and the mother have to be a yid. The chiddush over here is, in this case, because it's not mamish a melech, but it's just that we learn it from the pasuk, similar to a melech, that you should appoint someone in leadership that's from kerev achacha. So over here we say it's enough if the mother is a yid. Sagt die Gemara, Avdei de Rab Chiya Barami, the Evet Kanani of Rab Chiya Barami, Atpela lahi oivedes kachovim l'shem intesa. She had this Goyish woman do a tefillah l'shem intesa. L'shem intesa, Rashi says, means for the purpose of being mitayir herself from tumas nida. That's what he was. That's what she toivled for. So now the question is, this tefillah that she was toivl only l'shem being mitayir herself from being a nida. But she was a guy though. Does she become a yid through this tefillah or not? Amar Rav Yosef. So Rav Yosef says, Yochilne lachshuri ba, I could be machshir her that she's a yid, ubibrata, and I could be machshir her daughter as well, that her daughter will be kosher for Klal Yisrael. And he explains, ba, I could be machshir her that she was toivel only to be mitayir herself from tumas nida kederavasi. I could be machshir like because of what Rav Asi said. What did Rav Asi say? Dama Rav Asi, which the Gemara will quote mamish here soon, that mi leitavla linidusa, that when there was a question regarding someone that they said that she was a guy, so Rav Asi said, but she was toivel to get off the tumah of nida. So even though she wasn't toivel to be a yid, but being toivel to get off the tumah of a nida, that's enough that the tefillah should be effective even to be a yid. So this is a big chiddush over here. So Rashi explains, so there's 2 points. First of all, you're going to have to say, Rashi doesn't bring this, but the Mefarshim say, you're going to have to say what happened over here is, this wasn't Stam episode guy that went and was toivel. This was a guy that was already planning to be Megayed. Not only planning to be Megayed, he was already Mekabel all the mitzvahs. Elamai, he didn't do the last step of the Geiris, he didn't do the Tefillah yet. So over here, now the question is whether this Tefillah, L'Shem Nida, will be a good Tefillah or not. That's one point. Another point, Rashi explains why take is the tefillah l'shem nida going to help over here that it should also be l'shem geirus. So Rashi says because when she toivels l'shem nida, so she's being mekayim das Yehudis. She's being mekayim the halacha of being like a yid. She's doing this halacha. So this itself, it means that she wants to be a yid. So therefore, it's considered to be like a tefillah to be a yid. So therefore, you can be machshir her to be a yid. And the same thing also, similar. He said, I could be machshir the daughter, bebrata, I could say the daughter that will be kosher, because Oived Kechavim ve'Eved Abba Bas Yisrael, who's the one that had her be toivled? The Eved Kanani of Rav Yosef. The Eved Kanani of Rav Chiya Barabmi that was. And he had a relation with her, so but the child that's born is Havlat kosher, the child is kosher. Now here's the halacha where Rav Ashi actually said this. Hahuda avakadele bar Armaisa. There was an individual that they called him the son of an Armaisa, of an Armenian woman, that the mother was not a Yid. Amar Rav Asi, so Rav Asi said, Miloi Tavla Linidusa, that was she not toivel to be mitayir herself from her tumas nida, because they knew that she wanted to be a yid, and therefore she was noyeg like a yid, and she was toivel to get off the tumas nida. So that, like Rashi says, she was noyeg das Yehudis, so that's already a good tefillah even for Geirus as well. And a similar halacha, Ahuda avakadule bar Arma, individual they refer to him as the son of an Arami, of a guy. Amar Rabbi Shua ben Levi. So Rabbi Shua ben Levi also said, Mile tova lekeria. Was he never toivel to be mitayir himself from the tumah of his keri, and that the tefillah takes effect even to be able to be a yid as well. Amar Rav Chama bar Gurya, Amar Rav said, Azay halekeyach eved min ha'eved kechavim. A person that buys an eved kanani that was first owned by a guy. And now what happens usually? What's the halacha by Eved Kanani? When you buy Eved Kanani, so the Eved Kanani becomes partially a Yid. He has to have a milah, he has to be toivel l'shem avdos, and it becomes partially a Yid. But now what happened? This Eved Kanani that you were buying from a guy, v'kodam v'tova l'shem ben chayren. He went himself to the mikveh and he toiveled himself, and he toiveled himself having a mind with a purpose to become a full yid, to become a free and a full yid. So what happens now? Kana atzmei ben chayren. So what he did takes effect, and he will acquire himself. He becomes a full yid, and he becomes a ben chayren, and that's it. The yid that was trying to buy this eved to be a eved for him lost out. I mean, he's going to have to maybe reimburse this person that paid for him, but he has the ability to go ahead and do this and become a full Yid. Now the question is, how could he go ahead and do this? Wasn't he owned by a guy? If he's owned by a guy and a guy is selling him to a Yid, so how does he have the right to go? He doesn't even own himself. He's owned by a guy. So how does he have the right to go and be toivel himself to become a Yid? So the Gemara explains, my time, what's the reason for this? Because Ovid Kechavim Gufa Lekanile. The guy that owned this Eved, he doesn't own his body. He owns him just for the work that he does for him, but he doesn't own his body. So therefore, Maida Kanile, only what he owns of this guy, this Eved that he's selling now to the Yid, Hu de Maktin Leli Yisrael. That's what he's selling to the Yid. So he doesn't own the Eved himself. So therefore, V'kivin, the Kadam, V'tava, L'shem ben Chayrin, if he himself decides and goes that he wants to become a Yid and he titles himself to be a Yid, so then Afkel is Shibudei. The shibud that the guy had on him, and that shibud the guy wanted to sell to the Yid, it gets removed because he never owned his body. So therefore he has the right, he has the ability to go and toivel himself and become a Yid. The Gemara brings a comparison to this Kid Rava. This is similar to a halacha that Rava says, this is brought a lot of times in Shas. The Omar Rava says that you have three cases. Here this is talking about a person that owes somebody money. And he owes him money and he has a shibud on his properties, but not only a shibud, but he actually made an apoitiki. Apoitiki means poitehei koi. He says, here there's a specific object that from here you're going to collect your loan. So there's three different examples that he says. Hektish, chametz, v'shichror, mafkiim b'dei shibud. So one case is, let's say there was a shiur, he owned an ox, and he said, here, if it's from this ox that you'll collect your chayiv. Or he tells him, here, from this chametz, you'll collect the chayiv. Or he tells him, from this Evet Kanani, you'll collect the chayiv. So he has a shibud on these objects. But now, this person went ahead, and he was makdish this shiur to hektish. Rashi says that we're talking over here about a hektish, that he was makdish it to the mizbeach, which is a kedushas aguf. And because he was makdish it to the mizbeach, so now, even though there was a shibud on it before, you have the koyach to be makdish it to kedushas aguf, and the shibud cannot prevent that. And similar b'negei to chametz, that if there was a shibud on this chametz, and now comes the zmana isser of chametz, you have to go ahead and burn the chametz. Okay? And the shichrun, and also if you own the eved, and you go ahead and you free this eved, even though there was a shibud on this eved, you can go ahead and free the eved. So mafkim b'dei shibud, that removes, that annuls the shibud that there was on these objects or on this eved. So similar, the Gemara is saying over here, b'negeh to this Eved that was owned by the guy, even though the Eved had a certain shibud to the guy that owned him. And that shibud he's trying to sell over to the Yisrael. But that shibud is not strong enough to prevent him of taking control of his body and deciding to become a Yid. And therefore, if he titles himself to be a Ben Chayrin, he's going to be a Kasher Yid. So this the Gemara asks, Masav Rav Chizda asked from something that happened. Maise beBluria Hagiyaitis. There was a story with Bluria Hagiyaitis. So she was a guy, and she also owned slaves. Shekadmu Avadea v'Tavlu lefaneha. So before she became a Giyaitis, her slaves went and they toiveled themselves before her, and to become a Yid, and they became Ma'aslav Nechachamim, and they toiveled themselves to be a Yid. Now the question was asked by the Chachamim, what's the status of these Avadim? Do they have the right to do this? Do they become a Yid? V'amru, and the Chachamim said, Kanu atzmam b'nei chayrin. They were toivel before, and therefore they could become b'nei chayrin. So now the Gemara is medayik. What do I see from this story? Lifoneha in. If they toivel before her, so then they could become a ben chayrin. Because she's a guy, and she doesn't, if they decide to become a Yid, a guy does not own the body of a Yid. So if they title themselves to be a ger, they'll become a Yid. But afterwards, if they would title after she became already a Yid, so then she would own them, and therefore they cannot be kind of themselves to be b'nei chayrin. So the question is over here as well, if this guy wants to sell Eved to a Yid, so l'chayre, this Eved doesn't have the ability to toivel himself as a Yid. You're selling him to another Yid, and therefore the Yid has control over you. That shibud is being given over to the Yid, and therefore the Eved does not have a koyach to sell himself, to be meguide himself to become a full Yid. So the Gemara says, Loi, that's not how you have to be medayik from that story. Amar Rave said, Live on neha, if these avodim of this woman, Beluria, this guy, so when she was still a guy, Live on neha, so before she became a Geyayres, Bein Bestam, Bein b'mefurish, whether they went and they were toivel stam, they didn't spell out clearly that they're being toivel to be b'nei chayrin, or whether b'mefurish, whether they clearly said that they're being toivel to be b'nei chayrin. Either way, when they toivel before, they become a full yid, right? Because we assume that if they're going to be toivel, they're going to be toivel to become a yid. But la'achreha, afterwards, once she herself also became a yid, so b'mefurish in, if they're going to say clearly that they want to become a ben chayrin, so then like the halacha we said before, they're not owned, their body is not owned by their master, and therefore they could become a yid. B'stam loy, but if they're going to stam be toivel, then we're going to say that because we see that their master, Bluria, became a yid, so b'stam they're being toivel to continue being her evet, but not to become a yid. So in such a case, they're not going to become a yid. Rav Ivye said about this halacha that we said before, that this evet that was owned by a guy, so he has the ability to go and toivel himself to become a yid. This is only true when you're buying an evet from a guy. So because this evet, his body is not owned by the Goyish master, so he can go and toivel himself. But when it comes to the guy himself, so his body, a guy himself that comes to sell himself to a yid, the yid is buying the body himself of the guy, and therefore the guy will not have the ability to toivel himself to be a yid. Where do we see when a yid buys this oived kechavim that he's buying the guf of the guy, and therefore he can't be toivel himself? Because there's a pasuk that says, "V'gam ibnei tishav magarim imachem mehem tiknu." So you buy a evet Kanani from the goyim that live amongst you. So what do we learn from this? Atem kainim mehem. You can acquire from them from a guy, but v'loy heim kainim mikem. A guy cannot acquire a yid. V'loy heim kainim zeh mizeh. And also one guy that acquires another guy cannot acquire another guy. So now the Gemara explains what this means here. What does it mean when it says v'loy heim kainim mikem? That a guy cannot buy a yid. Lamai. Regarding what is it saying this? Is it saying that a guy cannot buy a yid for his work, that this yid should be a slave to work for him? Not for the body, but for the work. Could you say such a thing? A guy can't acquire a yid to work for him. But vaksiv, there's the pasuk that says, a yid gets sold to a eker, to a mishpacha of a ger. And what does a mishpacha of a ger mean? This means that a guy acquires a yid. So we see that a guy could acquire a yid to work for him. What it means to say is that a guy, even though he could own a yid to work for him, but he can't own the guf of the yid. And what does it say? That's what the Brais is saying regarding a guy not acquiring the yid. And then over here the Torah says, Atem kainim mehem afilu gufe. But you could acquire a guy, and you could acquire even the guf of a guy. So if when you buy a guy, you're buying his guf, so therefore the guy does not have control over his guf, he doesn't have the ability to go and be toivel himself to be a ben chayrin. No, but on this the Gemara asks, part of Rav Acher asks, but maybe I'll say, it's not true that when a yid buys a guy, he buys his whole body, you have full control over him. But maybe that's only bekaspe u betfile. It's not only after you pay him to buy him, but only after he's toivel. L'shem avdus. Then you have control over his whole body. But before he was toivel l'shem avdus, you still don't have any control over his body. So if he chaptarain and was toivel first to be a yid, so then maybe he will become a yid. So how do you know that because you're buying him and you're owning his guf, therefore he can't be toivel himself to be a ben chayrin? Maybe before you would toivel him to be a eved, if he wants, he can toivel himself to be a yid. And then it says it's the same halacha regarding what the Gemara said before. When it said before that you buy a eved from a guy, if you buy a eved from a guy, and the guy, this eved, did not go and toivel himself first to be a ben chayrin, you would toivel him to be your eved. You take a kaina his guf over there as well. You are kaina his guf. Elamai, because he chaptaran before and he was toivel himself to be a ben chayrin, so he becomes a yid. So we should say the same halacha over here. So the Gemara finishes off kashya. This remains a question. Shmuel says regarding when you're buying a guy to be a evet kanani, v'tzarech l'takve b'mayim. When you're toiveling him, you have to force him. The adon that's buying him should force him to toivel in the water. So like this, the tvila that he's toiveling should be l'shem avdos. If you're gonna allow him to toivel on his own, then if he's gonna have kavanah that he wants to be a yid, then that tefillah could be to be a ben chayrin. But if you're the one that's forcing him into the water, then his kavanah that he wants to be a ben chayrin is not going to help, because right now you're already forcing him to go into the water as an evet to you. So therefore, the tefillah is going to be l'shem avdos. And the Gemara brings an incident that happened. Ki haide minyamin avde de Ravashi, Minyamin, which was the evet of Ravashi, ba'ilat vuli. He wanted to be toivelim to become his evet. So Masrin alayah l'Ravina l'Ravache bered Rava. He gave over Minyamin to Ravina and Ravache the son of Rava, and Amalo he said to them, Chazu si, take responsibility here. The minaychu kabayisle. From you I'm going to demand him. In other words, if he's going to slip out of your hands and he's going to toivel himself to be a ben chayrin, then I'm going to demand from you to pay me back. So what do? They put this kind of a band around his neck, and arpale, they made it loose enough, and then vitzimtzimule, and then they made it tight. And the Gemara explains why did they loosen it, why did they make it tight. Arpale, they made this loose so that the water should come in between, it shouldn't be a chatzitze. Tzimtzimule, but then they made it tighter when he was going to be toivel, so that he shouldn't first come and say, Bacher as l'shem ben chayrin ani toivel, that I'm being toivel myself to be a ben chayrin. So like this, when he's being toivel, they're forcing him, they're making it tight to force him to be an evet. And then what happened? Bahadi the dali reishe, the moment he picked up his head out of the water, mimaya from the water, anchele zulte de tina areishe, they put a zulte, some kind of a keli full of tina, of cement or lime on his head. And they told him, go bring this to your master. So from the moment that his head came out of the water, they already gave him something that he should go be an eved to bring to his master. Some say that this last thing it didn't say in the Gemara before. Before it said tzarich l'tokvei b'mayim. Here it's adding another detail that even after his head comes out of the water, he should immediately act like an eved. So some say this is stam l'rafche de milsa. You don't have to necessarily do this. Amalei Rav Papa l'Rava. Rav Papa said to Rava, Chazi mar, did you see Hani debei Papa bar Abba? Those individuals that were working for Papa bar Abba. So this Papa bar Abba, Rashi says, was a very rich person. And the Yavu Zuzi le'inshi le'kargayu. So what happened is, so in those times, Rashi says, there was a head tax that everyone had to pay. What happened if someone didn't have head tax to pay? So then the government went and took the people to become avodim for them, to become an evet for the melech, to work instead of the head tax. So over here, Papa bar Abba, in their house, they were very rich, and they paid the head tax for those people that were poor and couldn't pay it. And they treated them like they're slaves, to work for them until they worked for them enough to pay up for the taxes that they didn't pay. So now you ask, the question is, so these were, amongst them were also goyim. So these were basically like avodim kananim that they acquired instead of the head tax that they were supposed to pay. So the question is, kinafki, after they work that time and they pay up enough work for the head tax that they're working for, so they leave, tzrichi gitte de chayrusa, do they need a regular get chayrus that you gift for evet kanani, or maybe not? In other words, the question is this like are you fully acquiring them like a regular evet kanani that needs a get chayrin, a shtar get to be freed or not? Or maybe this is just like this, they're temporarily confiscating them to work for them because they paid for their head tax. Omalei. So he said, Rava said, Eichu shchivi lo amru luchu hamilsa. If I would pass away, then nobody would tell you the halacha of this. Because I know I got the halacha of this, and the halacha that I heard is as follows. Hachi Omer Rav Sheshes. This is what Rav Sheshes said. Moyarkayu dahani, the Moyarkayu. Moyarkayu, Rashi says over here means, just a second, the seal of their being an Eved. Chaysim, Rashi says. In other words, the fact that they are an Eved, so where is it? To who are they really avodim? Betafse de malke monach. It's by the king, by the king. They owe the head tax to the king. They didn't pay the head tax, so instead they're really slaves to the king. Umalka Omar, and the king then says, Mandala Yov Karge, the one that doesn't pay head tax, Mishtabed Lamanda Yov Karge, and there's someone else that pays the head tax for him, so he becomes an evet for the person that pays the head tax. So basically what he was saying was, just like they would be full avodim to the king himself if they would not pay the head tax, now that's the Papa Barabi, they pay the head tax instead, so they become full avodim to him, and therefore they would need a get chayrin to be freed, like a regular evet kanani. The Gemara goes back to the halacha. We're going to learn one more shtickle over here to finish off this inyan. The Gemara goes back to the halacha that we learned before about a Bas Yisrael that had a relation with a goy. He came to the city of Gavla. And as we'll see here, this was a city of Yidden that were not B'nai Torah, they were Amaratzim. Chazu, so you saw in their behavior as follows. First of all, you saw B'nai Yisrael, the Ma'abram Megeirim, that there were Yiddish girls, that they were pregnant from those Geirim, that the Geiris was not properly done. Shemalu, they had a bris milah, but V'loi Tovlu. They never went to the mikveh. So really, the father is a guy. And V'chazu, they also saw another thing. Chamre the Yisrael, there was wine from Yidden, the Mazge of the Kechavim, that Goyim are pouring this wine. V'shasi Yisrael, and Yidden are drinking this wine. And V'chazu, the third thing they saw was tormison. There was kinds of beans that have to be cooked very, very well to be able to eat it. The Shalke of the Kechavim, that the Goyim cooked these beans. V'achli Yisrael, and the Yidden eat them. V'lo yamalu, v'lo midi. So Reb Chia bar Abba didn't say anything to them. Asla Kamei, the Rabbi Yechanan. He came to Rabbi Yechanan and told Rabbi Yechanan about what he saw. Amalei, Rabbi Yechanan told him, say v'hachriz al b'neiim, go and announce for their children shehem mamzeirim, that their children are mamzeirim, because the father is a guy. Val yeinam, and also announce regarding their wine mishum yayin nesach, that their wine is yayin nesach. And val tormison, and go announce regarding these beans that they were eating, that mishum b'shulei evdikechavim, that it's also for him to eat these beans because it's bishalakim, the goyim are cooking them. And he said, because these people in the city are not B'nai Torah. Therefore you should tell them. So Rashi says, that it says that they're not B'nai Torah only goes on the last point over here, as we'll see soon in the Gemara, that the Tormison really are not Bishalakum, but because they're not B'nai Torah, so you don't want them to be Mekel in this Inyan, so you should tell them that it's Bishalakum. So the Gemara is going to explain all three halachas here that he said. Al b'neim shem mamzeirim. This, that you should tell them that their children is mamzeirim. So this is Rabbi Yechanan l'taimei. Rabbi Yechanan follows his opinion that we said all the way at the beginning of this whole sugi here. The Amar Rab Chia bar Abba, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, la'olam enger. Oh no, this is another thing actually that Rabbi Yechanan said. So Rabbi Yechanan said that the child, any guy that is megayer, is not a ger at sheyimel v'yitpa, until you have both a milah and tefillah. So v'kivim delay tovel, since over here they were not tovel, oivik kechavimu. He's oivik kechavim. And now here, this is the halacha that Rabbi Yechanan said in the beginning of the sugi. Ha'amar Rabbi bar Chana, Ha'amar Rabbi Yechanan, oivik kechavim ve'eved abal bas Yisrael, a goy or an eved that has a relation with the bas Yisrael, avlad mamzer. The child is a mamzer. So this is his opinion. Therefore he said, tell them their child is mamzerim. And also he said, Val yeino mishum yayin nesach, tell them that their wine is yayin nesach. Mishum, so this, it's not really mamish yayin nesach, but this is a siyag. And this is a lashon, the Gemara says in many places, Mishum lech amrin nizire. We tell a nazir, go away, schar, go around, lekarmele sikrav. Don't walk through, don't come near a place where there's a vineyard. So the same thing over here, because this is goyim that are pouring the wine, even if it's not mamish yayin nesach, but this is a siyag that they should call it yayin nesach for them. Then val tormison mishum b'shulei v'kechavim. So he said that the tormison, these beans, are bishalakum, and so on that it said lefisheinam b'nei Torah. So you're saying this to them only because they're not b'nei Torah, so therefore you don't want them to confuse anything. So therefore he's telling them that it's bishalakum, even though really it's not bishalakum. So the Gemara asks on this, Ha b'nei Torah shari? Are you telling me that if there would be b'nei Torah, so this would not be bishalakum, would be allowed? But for Ha'amar Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak mishmei derav, kol hanechel kamei shuchai, the rule regarding bishalakum is as follows. If it's something that could be eaten raw, so then there's no halacha of bishalakim. So therefore the question is, tormis is beans that have to be cooked very well, and it cannot be eaten raw. So there is a issue of bishalakim. So why does it say here that he's telling that it's bishalakim only because they're not b'nei Torah? So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yechanan ki'idach lishna sviralei. Rabbi Yechanan holds like another version of what was said in the name of Rav. The Amar Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak mishmei de Rav, kol she'ein oila al shulchan melachim, if it's food that's not served by the table of a king, lechel by a pas to eat together with the bread, ein by mishum b'shulei evdikacham. There's no halacha of bishul akum. And we paskin like both of these statements of Rav, that in order for something to be bishalakum, has to be both something that's not eaten raw and something that's oil al shulchan balachim, because only then is this something that a guy will serve and invite you to his meal. You come to mingle with gayim. So therefore, the only reason why he said it's asa for them is because they're not b'nei Torah. But if they would have been b'nei Torah, shari, it would have been allowed.